Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 UBIE meeting. We are here in Poland, in the beautiful city of Krakow. We are here to talk about making UBIE pilots on a local, regional level happen. We are here to discuss a campaign, how we can encourage local decision makers to start basic income pilots across Europe. And we thought that it would be a good idea to dive into this discussion by having a look at what is the reality so far of pilots, especially smaller scale local regional pilots. And therefore, I'm very happy to have two distinguished experts of the topic here next to me. Will give us a few ideas, insights on how we can make pilots done actually in real life. What is the good way? What are the traps? And happy to welcome Jurgen De Wispelaere, not directly from Chile this time.
No, for a change.
Flew in from England, from Bath, and Fabienne Hansen from Freiburg.
Not from Brazil for a change.
Not from Brazil for now. Whom we asked, and whom we are very grateful that they accepted our invitation to get into this topic with us. And without further ado, I'm not sure who of the two.
I'll kick off.
Jurgen, you will kick off.
Great. So I hope the microphone works well. So good. First of all, thanks very, very much for inviting us. And I'm actually very happy I was able to make it because I've received several invitations over the past couple of years. And usually the problem was that it was on another continent. So this is the first time I'm ever actually able to make it. It's also a really, really fascinating topic. So I'm really interested to hear what it is that you guys effectively have planned with this campaign. So also on behalf of BNEC, so they're wishing us, all the best for the next couple of days, and also excited, and I'm supposed to report back there in due course. So people are really interested in what you guys are doing. Okay, so when Daniel first invited me, come, and that was all great. And then he told me the topic, getting pilots done, and I was sort of slightly, oops. So I know a lot about pilots. I'm not sure I know about how to get them done. I probably know a lot more how not to get them done. So, but then the solution was we bring Fabienne on board. Fabienne knows a lot about getting things done, not so much about pilots, but about a lot of other things. So the combination, hopefully it works out very well, okay? So what I thought I would do, so we sort of split it up a bit. So you're gonna have two separate talks, but that are related. I'm going to obviously kick it off. What I thought I would do, I kind of want to riff off a little bit about some research project that we actually started. We being Mark Dussard from the US and Joe Crisp from the UK, in which we're actually looking at the sort of politics of pilots, but especially the difference between the sort of the regional and the municipal level. So next slide, please.
Do we have the slides?
Yeah. So you guys actually can't see the slides. That's very unfortunate. I'm just realizing this. So I had a great title of this slide, which is UBIE pilots, everything, everywhere, all at once. So I don't know if you've seen the movie, but I was also very tempted of putting the picture of the movie in there, but that didn't quite work out. So the idea here is that, in a sense, to start off from an observation. So the observation is that the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of pilots happening. And they do happen at three big levels, right? So we have them at national level, we have them at regional level, we have them at local level. So, of course, we could go beyond that. I know there's debates, for example, about, I mean, you guys are UBIE, so there's been proposals of doing this at European level, for example, right? So that's not unknown. But in practical reality, we kind of have the three. So the national/federal ones, big examples are Finland and Ireland, right? Very, very different cases, but also sort of weirdly similar countries in various ways, right? You know, sort of small countries, agrarian kinds of background, sort of, you know, coalition politics, etc. But nevertheless, when it comes to the pilots, very, very different types of proposals there, right? On the regional level, so I had on my list Catalonia, Ontario, and Scotland, and then I just realized that's a very depressing list because, of course, Scotland never happened. Catalonia, they're kind of being blocked, and Ontario was basically got interrupted. We all know this. But of course, we can add Wales to the list. So Wales is actually doing really, really well, right? So these are, pilots that are happening at the regional level. And then at the local municipal level, we can think of Barcelona, we can think of the Netherlands, we can think, especially most recently, the US, of course, has literally mushrooming of pilots, at sort of local level, right? So the question is, when you see this, what are the sort of questions that pop up? I mean, why do we care that they happen at different levels? So I think, or we think, that there's sort of three really, really interesting sets of questions there. The first one, and that we need to understand better. So the first one is, when and where are these pilots happening? So why are they happening in some places and not happening in other places? We actually don't really know this, right? So we actually still don't have a clear understanding of why is it that happened in Finland and Ireland, but not in others? Why is it happening in some cities, but not in others? It's a really important question, obviously, and especially for your campaign. It's obviously something that you need to start thinking about, right? Or I'm sure you've already thought about. But then related to that is the question, how are these things designed, implemented, and evaluated? And are these two questions linked? So does it matter that something like, say, for example, Finland or Ireland manages to have a pilot, and does that have implications of how they design, implement, evaluate it, right? And the same thing at the levels of cities, for example, right? So these are separate questions, but they are linked in an important way. And there's a third question, which is what happens after, right? Once these pilots are done, does that mean that the debate is done? That, we don't hear about it anymore, such as, for example, happening in Finland, right? Or does that actually still have some ongoing relevance? An example here could be, for example, B-Mincom in Barcelona effectively was a clear inspiration for the Catalan pilot that, hopefully will still get kickstarted. So again, these three things can be linked. Now, at the moment, we really have no clear sense of how this all works, right? This is a really, really important thing. We're only starting to look at this. And I guess my argument and our argument in this research project is we need to start taking this very seriously. We need to start analyzing how is it that municipal pilots are different? How is it that regional pilots are different? How is it that national pilots are different? A lot of that, in my sort of perspective, is about the politics of it, right? Very, very much so. So two interesting things about that is that in some sense, if you think, like I do, that they really are separate, that also means you have to be very careful from what you take from a national pilot in terms of information for your municipal pilot, right? There's going to be a limit to what you can learn from Finland and Ireland if you want to go mayors for basic income. At the same time, very importantly as well, these three scales, as we call them, they're very much linked. So your campaign for mayors is not going to be independent from what's happening at regional debates and national debates, etc. So it gets complicated very, very fast. Now, our research project is not about making it happen. Our research project is about trying to understand it. And at the moment, to be honest, we're still very much at getting to the right questions, right? So I have no answers in a clear sense. To be honest, I also find personally that answers are usually boring. Getting to the right questions is actually a lot more exciting, but it's also really, really hard, right? So that by way of background. I have another fancy slide, and just for evidence, there is a fancy, I actually spend a bit of time putting a little bit of graphics. So thinking now to actual municipal pilots, one of the things that strikes me is people often think about municipal pilots as if it's one thing. And I think there's at least 4 different types. And I think it matters which are the ones that you go for. So first of all, we have actually pilots that are happening at the local level, but they're actually governed, initiated, funded by national or regional level. So these are, in my book, these are national projects. They just happen to be run at the local level. Very interesting, right? In a way, I mean, I think they're fake municipal pilots. They're fake local pilots. So I kind of want to put them aside. I mean, of course, it's nice, right? And they have sort of, you know, they have some interesting research advantages. But if you're thinking about setting up something like, you know, mayors for basic income, they're not interesting, right? They're just a very, very different beast. A second one that I think is not interesting is you basically have pilots that just happen to emerge in one place, but there's no sense of building on it. So they're very idiosyncratic. This might be because a mayor has decided that there's a bit of funding and we're going to do a little program and we just, you know, we want to build on the hype and we have this, we do that. And there's no clear sense of actually doing anything with it. I think for very important reasons, these are not that interesting either, because there really is no plan to expand. There's no plan to build on it, right? So then there's 2 that I think are interesting, but they can be very, very different. So the first would be a scenario where you have a local pilot and it spreads laterally. It goes from one city to another city, etc., right? The other one is the one where you have a local pilot and it's a stepping stone for a national policy, right? So 2 very different dynamics. One is about spreading across the same level laterally. The other one is really about trying to build a national policy. In my mind, these are very fundamentally different things, right? So, and it's really interesting to think through which of the ones is it that you're interested in. So in your case, are you doing a campaign for mayors because you really want to keep this at the municipal level, or is the idea that this is a campaign for mayors that is meant to be upscaled to a full national policy? Why is that important? Because the objectives are very different, the resources are very different, the actors involved, the people you have to interact with, the politicians, the stakeholders, the researchers, they will be very different interest groups. And so the challenges are very different. So the politics of these 2 examples are really fundamentally different. And I think people need to be a bit more clear about what is it that they want to do, right? So how am I doing for time, actually?
Very good.
No idea. Very good? Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges coming at this from, you know, sort of from a review, if you like, or from insights from pilots in general, is that basic income pilots always operate at science-politics interface. What that means is they have 2 masters, right? There's a science part, there's a policy-politics part. There's always people who basically say we should do one more than the other. So I've talked to a lot of people who basically think that the basic income pilots is all about the science, right? Best example is Finland. They were very, very, very keen on keeping this as scientific as possible. But for example, some of that is happening in the US as well. Some of the pilots there, they're very, very rigorous about the science. But one of the things that they're doing as they're doing that is they're trying to keep the politics and the policy out, right? What's the problem with that is that, of course, pilots are also part of building the politics and building the policy of it, right? So if you're making the science very dominant, then the very obvious consequence is that this will be great for publishing academic papers. It's not very likely to get you anywhere else, right? But the other side is also true. So on the other side, I hear a lot of people talking about, let's not worry about the silence, let's just have these pilots. The problem there is that one of the main reasons why the pilots are actually doing the work, especially with, decision makers, is because they have the science behind them. So, so decision makers really do want to have evidence and pilots, to know what really, really works. So if you compromise on that, so if you put everything on the politics and you don't take the science seriously, then, in some sense, what you're basically doing is you're kind of offering a free lunch to the basic income critics. All you need in a government is someone who basically says, hold on, this is not a serious scientific project, forget about it, right? So now we have a problem, right? Two masters, serving two masters is not easy, right? So forgetting about one is a problem, forgetting about the other is a problem. Putting them together is problematic. Next slide, please. So how about balancing? I had a fancy picture of an elephant on a ball. So I have to, this, I was going to show this to the people here. You can see it online. There you go. So the whole thing about balancing science and politics is a problem for every pilot, but it's interesting to think, what does that mean for municipal pilots specifically? So that in a sense would be kind of my challenge to you guys as you're doing this. Think very carefully about this science politics bit, but think of what that means at the municipal level. So I think there's at least 5 issues, but I'm sure there's more. The first one is, I think size matters. For the science part, effectively, micropilots are problematic, right? I mean, you need a certain number of people doing things in order for the results to be scientifically valid. A lot of municipalities, especially smaller ones, obviously are going to have very small groups of people. That's just going to be a problem, right? From the science perspective. So you need to figure out ways to deal with that. And there are potentially some solutions. Maybe we can talk about this later. I mean, one of the interesting things, of course, you have to adapt your design and your implementation and all that to the local circumstances. But that can change, right? So I mean, we see a lot of variation in national context, but municipal contexts can go really, really varied a lot, right? Also because local priorities are very different. So if you look at the US, all these municipal pilots, so to speak, there'll be one that's targeting homeless, there'll be another that's targeting single parents, there'll be another that's targeting this, etc., etc. Part of that is because the local politics is influencing all this, right? So you have to adapt to the local circumstances, but that brings in a lot of variation, which both, again, could be an issue on the science side, but it also could mean that, how do you build on that, depending on, if you want to turn this into a national policy, if you want to turn this into a wider policy, it poses a challenge. Buy-in from local stakeholders, very obvious, but buy-in, so basically means that, you have a local pilot, you need to get the right people on board, but every time you have the right people on board, that comes with compromise, right? This is your politics, right? And that's going to change again from place to place. Access to resources could be more problematic on the local level. For example, one of the things they did in the Netherlands, for example, is they actually bundled a number of pilots in order to have a research team that was able to do all this, right? Not every place has a university, has a team ready to deal with this, right? So you need to think of how are the ways that we can, make use of resources that perhaps means that we need to bundle type of things, right? So, and then of course, there's the fifth thing is something I already mentioned is, in one sense, you want to focus on the local politics, But municipalities are always part of regional and national politics as well. The moment you do something as controversial as a basic income pilot, you can guarantee that there's going to be, Netherlands again, great example, right? Within the Netherlands, they were trying to do local experiments. At some point, the national government just got involved, right? So they're basically saying, hold on, what are you doing here? So think locally, but also keep in mind that this is going to have a broad impact, right? So one final slide, and then I'm passing it on to my honorable colleague. So I was kind of thinking, fancy question mark. I was thinking, so in a sense, you can have a lot of questions around very practical kind of stuff, right? So how to do this, what's the time, what's the funding, what's the population, what's the this, what's the that, etc., etc. But I think in some sense, the really important questions are the more fundamental ones. So question number one, what do you want to know? What do you want to learn? So if you think of this, of a pilot as part of that is really about finding out information, what is it you want to know, right? What is it you want to know within a municipal pilot that we don't already know from other places, etc.? Secondly, related but different question, what do you think you know, but you still want to show, right? So it's not enough to know things. Part of turning science into politics or into policy is being able to demonstrate it. So there may be things that you already know, but you still need to be able to show it in a proper way. So one of the comments I always get from people in the movement saying that we've done so many pilots, we know that they all work, why are we still doing this? Well, that's why we're still doing this. You still need to demonstrate it, right? So those are questions you need to think about. Third question, in a sense, is sort of why a pilot here and why a pilot now? I mean, are you basically just thinking we're riding a wave? Or are there other reasons why it's really, are you having a strategy where you say, these are really the places we want, and maybe some places we want first, and other places we want to wait a bit and we want to see how it happens, right? So, in politics, sequencing and timing is a big thing. So you can think about your pilots like that as well, right? You can have an attitude where you say, I'll take whatever comes and we'll just use it, very opportunistic, and maybe that's right. Maybe that's the way to go. Or you can be more strategic. So it's just something worth thinking about. And fourth big question, what do you want to do after? Last point. That is the big one, always. You can have your pilot and, hopefully it all goes well, but then what do you do after? And the reason I'm telling you to think about this now is you can already now make decisions that's going to have an impact on what you do after. But first you need to figure out what is you want, and then you need to figure out whether you can fit that in with all these other kind of constraints and challenges, right? That's what I have for you. So, you have to have the same one.
Thank you very much.
Now we're moving it on to Fabienne.
Okay. So now we heard a lot about questions on pilots, but also this is going to be, I'm sorry for the people in the room, because this would be way nicer with the graphics, I'm telling you. I'm going to do the same as Jurgen and keep turning this around. He's like, I really, really had fun with the graphic design of this. Just going to...
We are just going to watch the recording.
And actually, we can share the slides anyway, right? You have the slides.
So now I'm going to run you through an example of a municipal policy. So not a pilot, an actual UBI policy. The only thing is, it's in Brazil, not in Europe. So I'm sure a lot of you heard about the municipality of Maricá, who in 2013 first established something similar to UBI, which then developed into something that's actually called a UBI. And since 2013 is continuously running as a municipal policy, paid out in a digital currency to the people within the city. This is not what I'm going to talk about, just to mention it. I'm going to talk about the first expansion of this. Jürgen mentioned this lateral spread from municipality to municipality. And I'm going to look at the city of Niteroi, which is like a little bit bigger, about twice the size as Madaka. So we're talking 500,000 of inhabitants. And it's the next city to Rio de Janeiro, which probably is, for the people who know their geography, the place they know. So we're very close to Rio here. To put this in context, as a country, Brazil has a very strong exchange between municipal and federal level. So whenever something happens on the municipal level, it has impact on the federal level. But also the municipalities have the power to decide stuff for themselves. So they can do independent policies for the local context, which is kind of like a thing that was put in the constitution in 1988 after Brazil re-democratized. A good example for this, how this happened in the exchange level, is the Bolsa Familia. It started out as one municipal policy. It became multiple municipal policies. It went to the federal level. It became Bolsa Familia. So something very similar, but in way smaller scale and not yet on the federal level, is what is happening right now with the UBI policies. So it started in Maricá. The pandemic hit. So here you have the moment where like political power shifted and like the municipalities and the state all of a sudden had a lot of money and gave it to people who were adventurous in the decision making. So, and now you have it slowly spread into different places. So we're going to now look at this policy. Next slide. And which is called Moeda Social Araribóia. So for the English-speaking people, social currency Araribóia, which also explains what it is. It's like a social currency and a social policy. So it was inspired by UBI very strongly. So it has a lot of principles that are UBI based, but it's not a very like clean UBI. I don't like saying this because this suggests that there is a perfect UBI, and I actually don't believe this because so much depends on.
But there's a perfect definition of UBI, and it doesn't fit that one.
Which is not our topic.
Yeah, we can get into
Luckily,
we can get into this after, Jurgen. So what is interesting about this? It's like this policy. By now, it started out relatively small. Now it reaches about 45,000 families, which is about 10% of the population of the city, and it's supposed to spread even further and be like expanded. What is also interesting is that it's based on a currency that can only spend locally. So this currency is bound one-to-one to the Brazilian real. It's not printed money, it's digital, so you can use it via app, or if you're like a recipient of the policy, you get like a magnetic benefit card, which is like obviously bound to you as a person. It works like a normal credit card. The app works like PayPal, which is probably what most people know here. And it's paid out monthly, and people can spend it on whatever they want, only limited by the city itself. So like you can only spend it within the city because it's a local currency, and it's also limited by the amount of businesses registered. One thing that was a problem until this year, for example, with that is that there was no dentist registered. This changed now. It's a very practical issue, and people complained about this. They were like, okay, we can spend it on groceries, we can go to the pharmacy and spend it there, we can buy everyday items, but if we need to pay the dentist, because the dentist is not included in the health insurance, we can't do this. And if you're a business and you're registered and for like this use, you can also exchange the currency to like the national currency, but this costs a small fee of 2%, which then goes back to the bank who manages it. And this 2% administrative fee is used to finance microcredits for small business owners, for example. Next slide. So how does this look? Basically, you have 4 positions. you have 4 positions. There's a nice graphic for this, which is like the bank, the Aradiboya Bank, which is the administrative organ. It's managed by the city council itself, so they have influence on it, but it's a separate entity. So it was founded, there was a law, and they made this bank, and this bank basically has all the accounts for everyone who uses Aradiboya. Then they pay out monthly around 260 reais. It's a little bit more, but 260 is nicely convertible into euros. That's about like, oh God, live math, 40 euros a month. So it's like around the extreme poverty line. It's a little bit over it. And they get it every month. It can be added up depending on how many people in your family are registered. So it's paid, it's calculated individually, but paid out per household. Then there's obviously the local businesses. They can exchange quite a little bit more, so they can circulate it among themselves. So they can technically buy other supplies from other businesses, or they can also pay their employees with it. So there is technically no limit to this, or they can exchange it out against a small fee. And then there's the third group, which is the other account holders, which currently are mostly city officials and researchers and people who are like really, really convinced by the program and they want to use it. So I, for example, have an account. People, if I go to the supermarket and spend Aradiboya, people look at me a little bit strangely because my Portuguese is weird and I'm obviously not a recipient. And yeah, basically, then there would be a picture of how the app looks. So but just imagine your typical PayPal screen, then you have it. So like it has the same options. Next slide. So what does this policy have that's similar to UBI? So it has a payout in cash of some kind. As I just said, it's a parallel currency. But it works like normal money. It's a regular payment, so it's paid out monthly. The amount stays the same, except if the city decides to up it in the next expansion phase. The last one was in May, also where they registered new recipients, and now it's on hold because there's elections in exactly 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, in exactly 2 weeks, and then depending on who gets elected, the policy might change or not. And it is individual. Well, in this case, kind of not. It is unconditional. So basically, you do not have a requirement that you have to go for health checkups, that you have to send your kids to school, which are like normally conditional conditions that are given in most cash transfer programs. This one does not have it because it was inspired by UBI. It is, interestingly, accumulative. So if you receive Bolsa Familia, the federal payout, you can add without any problems your Aradiboya payout on top. It doesn't affect each other in the way of like, oh no, you're earning too much, we're reducing one of your payouts, which is mostly due to this being an alternative currency. So it doesn't get put into like the general Brazilian tax system. It's basically not taxable. Then, does it have an adequate value? Well, one could discuss about this. 40 euros or 260 reais is not enough to live on in a month in a city like Rio. You can about getting your monthly groceries for that. So a lot of beans, lots of rice. That's in your rent, probably not. Or anything else, unexpected expenses like you need petrol for your car. Well, that's not in there. Also, is it universal? Well, definitely not. It only reaches currently about 10%, but there are plans to expand it further to reach more people and also go up to people who are not as vulnerable as the current recipients. Very pragmatically, they started with the most vulnerable people and then basically wanted to do the opposite of grandfathering something in and just expanding it to less vulnerable groups. If you see the slides at the bottom, you can also see the different cards. The orange one is the Adadiboya one, and the other ones are from neighboring municipalities who have similar programs, which then you can also see in the next slide, where you can see that as of now, there is multiple municipalities in Rio de Janeiro state who also implemented a policy like this. And the most exciting about this map is like one of the big orange plots, which is Rio de Janeiro, the city, who just recently decided to also start a policy based on a digital currency inspired by UBI. Rio de Janeiro has 6.5 million inhabitants. And even if they start with the 10%, which is the World Bank recommendation, we can debate about it, how much sense it makes to that the poorest 10% get it, and why is it always 10%? But like, even if they only reach the poorest 10% in the beginning, this is a lot of people. So, and what is also interesting is that currently the original policy in Maricá and also the first expansion in Niterói is financed by all revenues. So these municipalities are very, very rich. 50% of the Brazilian oil production comes from this coast. Brazil is the biggest non-OPEC oil producer. So like, this is a lot of money, but now it's spreading to municipalities where there's no oil. So they had to find different revenues to finance this. And they're getting very creative with it. And they're not imposing new taxes. They're trying to find the money in other ways too. Yeah. And with this positive example, I would end. And thank you all for listening to Jurgen and to I. And I hope it was interesting for you.
Thank you very much on both interventions beyond interesting. Especially, I'm very happy that you wrote this example from Brazil. We here in Europe tend to think of ourselves as the vanguard of human civilization, and always good when we can also recognize that that we can learn from.
Do you want to have a look at the slide?
From other places, and I think there was very lots of interesting insights what you just shared. I have first of all, of course, the floor is open. I will a little bit abuse the fact that I hold the microphone in my hand.
That can be arranged.
my first questions, but I'm sure that here in this room have also questions, and if you're watching the stream, feel free to use the YouTube comment section. We already have questions. We already do have questions. That's great.
Nice.
So we will try to bring that in here as well. First of all, Jürgen, I think you highlighted geniusly these various interdependencies between science and UBI politics, also in terms of how do we use, what do we want to do with pilots, why do we want to have pilots. I think we can also add, or you basically already added the third angle, and that's the local decision makers. So why is it good for them to have the pilots? We convince them. I think your questions are a great starting point for the weekend here. For planning the campaign. What I came to realize also a little bit is that we are planning here a campaign for UBI pilots, but basically UBI pilots themselves are campaigns for UBI. If you just, and that's something you kind of mentioned, if you just think of how for example, the Finnish pilots were interpreted by various people, and how fast the words spread that they hate, and obviously we know for better. And if you look more into it, that's not what they tell us. But I think it's important to, as you said, to plan the pilot itself not just as a scientific experiment, but as a political campaign So I found it really, very good point. I would ask maybe there also, you talked about these different models of municipal pilots, and I'm wondering, so would the approach be more or less thousand blossoms bloom, and each municipality find their own way? As you said, of course, local interests questions are always different. Or is it from a UBI campaigning point of view, so in terms of longer perspective of getting UBI introduced? Is it, or also from a scientific perspective, not better to, I don't know, to try to get the municipalities to somehow develop an ideal design of municipal pilots so that we get comparable answers to the same question from different experiments. And to Fabienne, I have a wonderful question that comes not from me. I'm just adding a question mark because the gentleman who, interestingly enough, have not heard your presentation, but after his invitation for tonight, he wrote something about, you talked about the digital currency, and I think that's one big debate we are getting now in the UBI movement. Big discussion with some people in a radio show a few months ago in Germany. To what extent digital currencies are a threat to the UBI movement. So this gentleman wrote us, I'm adding just a question mark at the end because he forgot. Basic income will mean credit card systems, and your government will allow you to buy something or will deny you any purchase. These silly dreams of UBI are pseudo-communist masturbations. You are probably chess pieces on the board of the globalists that try to treat everyone against everyone. Question mark.
Okay. So digital currency credit cards. There's two ways to see this. There's the German way, where they're currently doing the new Bürgergeld payouts in Bavaria, for example, via these cards. Well, it plainly sucks what they're doing in Bavaria, because they basically limited, you can only get 50 euros a month out in cash from this card. You can, second of all, digitalization in Germany. Let's not get into that. We love our paper as a country, like literally. I recently sent something via a fax machine. It was like the most 90s experience I had, and it's 2024.
Did the other person also have a fax?
The other person requested it to be sent by fax. They're like, this is Germany, this is how it works. You can still fax things. And it's the height of technology. No, so
Germany will pay off the UBI when introduced by
fax. Yeah. So no, there is ways where like basically this becomes like could become a tool for the state or the municipality or whatever entity you have running this to control people. Yes, this is there. But if you look at this concrete examples in Brazil, this is not what is happening. They registered basically every legal business that there is and a few informal ones on top of this. So you can go to the beach in Niterói and you can buy your cool Coca-Cola that the informal seller is carrying around in a cooler on the beach. You can pay this with Aradiboya. So, but this is also a country that's like very highly digitalized in a lot of ways. You can vote since the 90s digitally in Brazil. So it's actually a really funny comparison. So yeah, this is my answer to this. Sure. There's definitely ways to abuse this, but there's also a lot of ways where this is very, very helpful. And also, if done rightly, saves municipalities a lot of money. Imagine them having to print all this like parallel currency. The amount of First of all, the amount of paper that has to go in this is not environmental friendly. Second of all, the cost behind it. Someone has to like actually keep this money safe. It becomes digital. It's in the app. I mean, yes, you need a smartphone, but they also found a way around this. If you're too poor and you don't have a smartphone, you get the magnetic benefit card. And there's a lot of people who know how to use a card these days. Yes, there's also things where financial education is missing and people don't know how to use a credit card. But these are issues you can practically solve by education.
Can I add two things to this? So one of the really interesting things in the Brazil debate around the local currency was, so one of the main arguments was that they wanted to keep this locally because it would push local development. So then there was the question, what do we do with the supermarkets? Because of course the supermarkets get this, and then the first thing they do is they just change it into regular currency and it goes out, right? So there was a really quite a big debate from what I understand, initially in Maricá especially, right? But where basically the people who were all in favor of local development were basically saying, no, we need to keep the supermarkets out. But then the people who came at it from a basic income perspective, they basically said, we appreciate your argument, but basic income is free use, right? I mean, the moment you start restricting it, it's a problem. Mm-hmm. So ultimately that camp won. And so what you have now, it's free use, but yes, with the problem that, yes, part of the money goes out. So what you have there is that two very interesting perspectives have to be compromised, right? So, but it's an interesting add-on to this. And I'll say one very quick thing about all the people who complain about basic income controlling. It's not like we don't have all these other policies controlling, right? I mean, what I don't understand about that argument is it's not like we have freedom all over the place and suddenly basic income is going to introduce control. I mean, seriously? I mean, right?
Yeah. I mean, with a few years of background in consumer protection, I also think that digital currency is not good or evil per se. It depends a lot of how you regulate it.
Sure.
In the end, and there are certain ways to regulate it in a good way. And also, it might be, as you just explained, a good way also around one of the challenges which you touched upon a little bit. When you try to do a basic income experiment or policy on a local level, you also run into policies that are not decided on a local level.
Absolutely.
About benefits that, if for example, say, okay, I give you a basic income, but then in exchange, you don't need those benefits. So maybe also local digital currency can be a way around this dilemma.
If they allow it. I mean, one of the reasons why it works in Brazil is because there is a community bank that backs it up, so doing this in Europe, like we don't have that tradition, we don't have that regulation in place. I mean, the politics of that, I imagine, is going to be very complicated, right?
So like at the same time, just to very quickly add on this, community currencies per se also are a thing that a lot of European municipalities experimented with. Not in the context of policy, but like at some point, literally every third city in Germany had some kind of like city money. I mean, it was mostly physically, and you also could only spend it locally, but it did exist. It was often run by initiated by some small collective who thought, oh, that would be a nice idea, something fun for the tourists. So, but like per se, as a movement, community currencies are not something that didn't and don't exist in Europe. It's just like they don't have the institutional backing in form of a community bank like they developed in Brazil.
I remember Oli Candace talking in a conference in Freiburg about how getting around EU rules was the biggest challenges for the experiment in Finland. So I can imagine that if you try to do a local experiment, you might in Europe, then you might have to fight not just against your federal national level, but also against the EU level. So it might be tricky, but we will see, for example.
But the US, for example, has good examples there, right? So a lot of the US pilots, they had to figure out, they basically had to apply for special exemption for the people who got the money, because otherwise there would be problems with the taxes, there would be problems with all the other benefits that they're entitled for. So they had to find a way, in a sense, the way that the social currency, as Fabienne was saying, it sort of does that automatically because it's sort of invisible from the state perspective almost. But in a lot of these municipal pilots, if this is regular cash, it is very visible. So then suddenly, you know, yes, you are constantly interacting with programs, rules, regulations that are not municipal. They're very much, you know, state or federal or whatever you want, right? So that becomes a massive problem fast.
Just a very short question, and then I promise really opening the floor.
Sure.
But also to give you a little bit of advertising space, you're running the UBI data project. Is that project also collecting data about challenges connected to UBI pilots, or do you just collect basically outcomes?
Not just outcomes. So first of all, thanks. I'm happy to say something. So UBI data is a very, very new project. We literally just launched it at the BN Congress in Bath last month. So the whole idea of UBI data is that we take effectively publicly available information at the moment from, you know, a select group of experiments / pilots. It's not just outcomes data. We also have, for example, a lot of descriptive data, right? But we're not, you know, we don't sort of identify challenges, etc. Our point is not to start analyzing things. What we take is a lot of data that is available in reports and publications, and also we've actually been interviewing people to make sure that our interpretation is correct. But when you go through all these pilots, they're reported in very different ways, they have very different designs, they measure different things, etc. So it's really, really problematic to get a handle on that just massive variation of information out there. What our project does is we try to basically harmonize it. We try to sort of, you know, standardize things, make sure that all the information is complete, and then we're trying to basically put it in a data explorer tool that tries to effectively produce that, you know, user-friendly tables and information and plots, etc., right? So at the moment, the reason I'm saying it's selective pilots, we're very much just, we launched a beta version. It's a proof of concept, if you like. We only have 6 countries. We have about 18 experiments, right? In the meantime, actually, in the last couple of weeks, I got several people, including my Grundeinkommen, for example. They approached us and said, hey, what do we need to do to get in there? And it's like, well, at the moment, you know, we're literally still building this up and we're still reviewing and revising. But effectively, you know, the moment you have data, you basically get in touch, you send us, you know, and then we look at what we need, and there's no limit of what we want to include. Right, so that's really important. It's just because at the moment it's still very much in trial phase that we have limited it. But there's, you know, if later on, once we expand, the idea is to really start including more and more information. Right? But the challenge is you have to figure out yourself.
So definitely probably part of our task, building a knowledge base of challenges.
So, but we hope that UBI data will be helpful. You know, maybe not in its current limited phase, but going forward, we hope that this would actually be really helpful to the people, you know, various mayors who want to organize their own pilots. That's exactly it.
So, questions should we start in the room, or do you want to, let's throw in maybe the microphone.
Oh, I should also say, I forgot, but UBI data, you can access ubidata.io. So anyone who's interested, go and have a quick look and send us comments.
International Specialising Week asks, how does UBIE work with them together to the theme of pilots?
That's a question for you guys. That's not. But good question.
Working together with for example. But I think there we are also very open for suggestions. So the board of UBIE and the board of PN are in sort of regular contact and exchange, and we are of course always happy for questions that we should carry into this exchange. But yes, I mean, we obviously when we are doing the campaign, many people within UBIE are also attached to these to the end. So I think we do not really have to worry about being too separated on this.
But I'll say one thing on behalf of Bien, so to speak. So both myself and Fabienne are on the executive committee. So I think from a Bien perspective, we actually would welcome, in a sense, exploring options for more collaboration. And one of the reasons for that is people who might be aware of this, have followed what we've been doing recently, or were at the Congress where we presented this. We've started to sort of a movement to decentralize Bien, and in large part, in the first steps was to create these hubs in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, and in Africa. So the idea is to really support the people there building a network. But we're really, in the next sort of stage, we really also want to make sure that this is very decentralized, so the decision stays there. We're sort of, we're facilitating rather than anything else. But we also became aware that it's a bit odd only to focus on these regions, because there are other regions. So ideally, we actually also want to then start thinking more about, hey, let's work on a region in Europe. And of course, the difference is that in the region in Europe, there are already networks such as UBIE. So there is a lot of scope to talk and have a proper sort of exchange of views and start thinking about what could we potentially be doing together, etc. So very good question, and we're working on it.
Next question.
So our friend Werner asks, his first question is, the introduction of the UBIE policy will lead to a structural change in society. Is there any historical evidence that pilots or trials in the past have led to a radical policy change? One big question, Werner. He has another one. He asks, the main political barrier to UBIE implementation is the financing of UBIE. Do you think that pilots and trials can contribute to overcome this political barrier?
Yeah, that's, I think, the $1,000 or $1 million question. I'm not sure, but definitely, I think during the whole weekend, the question of financing will be an important one. If we look at, especially to Catalonia,
sure,
we can see how much
absolutely
how crucial this question can be. And if you want to say something on this. And also to the other question.
I think the financing question is actually something Jurgen raised. It's about exactly not where it's, yes, in the end, it's where does the money come from, but it's also is there political will to go and search for the money? And this is exactly the point made when he talked about how do we make stuff happen and what's the goal of a pilot or trial. So it's exactly this, is there political will? And if not, how does someone create that political will? So it's kind of like what we said there first, the chicken or the egg. Because if there is political will, you can have a pilot. If you have a pilot, you can convince people to create that political will if the pilot has a positive outcome, ideally, which we have also seen in past experiences that is not always exactly what will happen, even if there is positive results.
Sure. I mean, so Reinhard makes good points, right? So the financing is a big hurdle, obviously. So one of the problems with the pilots is that, I mean, of course, you need funding to run the pilots, but that's not the question. The question is, do the pilots tell us anything about the financing of basic income itself in a big sense? And the answer to that is usually no. And the main reason why no is because, say, for example, in the Finnish pilot, they had to go around the taxes because it was impossible to include the taxation. Many of the current pilots are doing something similar. So, of course, to the extent that the policy, basic income is a tax benefit policy, right? So it's about providing people with, but it's also about the financing thing. And in many of the pilots, that is excluded, with the exception of the fact that there's a lot of research going on with microsimulations and so on. So it's an excuse to kind of bring in a lot of additional information, but the pilots themselves are not going to be the thing that's going to convince governments that the finance problem is resolved. And that actually leads me to the second, or the first point that Reinhard raised, which is, are there any pilots that have, contributed to radical transformation? I guess, I mean, I'm not a full-blown world historian, but I imagine the answer again is no, right? So why do we do pilots? Well, I have a very simple answer to that. And in a sense, this is something that Daniel was saying. The pilots themselves are a campaign, right? It's a very important part. For me, my answer to this is pilots at the moment are the only game in town, right? This is what decision makers will accept, with the exception of Brazil. Brazil is the one place now that has a policy. They skipped pilot. But in most other locations, and there's a reason why this happens in Brazil. Brazil is a very unique country for that, right? But in most countries at the moment, you try to push for basic income as a policy, you can try, but you're going to run into hard walls very fast. And politicians might be able to give you a pilot, at which point the question is, do we take it, yes or no? I think that's a no-brainer. Of course we take it. But then you have to use it very cleverly, and that's where the campaigning comes in, right? That's exactly the point. So Mayors for Basic Income is a campaign, but as we're doing them, it becomes a campaign for something else, and that's the answer of that one, right? Of course, that's not a shortcut. That's a lot of hard work and a lot of uncertainty. It may not go anywhere. Who knows? But let's try.
Yeah. Actually, without being able to give concrete examples, but in very many policy fields, pilots are often the way to break resistance to new political ideas. So politicians, especially nowadays, are very cautious with trying new things. So having an empirical evidence that some new concept actually did work in a limited setting often helps, and also on other policy fields, so like transport policies and so on. We have other questions in the room. Ulrich.
I just have a comment to Reinhard, and it's on your first question. Your question was whether pilots could lead to general policies, whether we have some examples in history. Yeah. So I would reverse the question. So we should question, are there historical examples that general policies emerge without certain policies? When you look at the development of capitalism, so pilots in certain local areas. Also, if you look at certain variants of capitalism, neoliberal variant or the Green New Deal variant, all these variants pilots, and we can extend the emergence of the hitherto social state, also start to little rent and so on. I think the only thing where there was a big transformation without pilots was the French Revolution. But all the other things emerge slowly. Okay, that's the thesis. Maybe you can deny it, but I think it's more this way. Yeah, and that leads us to our strategy as basic income proponents. Yeah, we need pilots and global policy to start these big but very slow transformation.
As a historian, I found it actually quite intriguing to look at the French Revolution as a policy pilot.
No. Disrupted.
No, but you could say the French Revolution.
Post Second World War, welfare state was very disruptive time as well, right? There were no.
There were cause before.
So I don't know whether we want to. I mean, I'm happy to sort of engage in this, but I don't. Or do we want to take different questions? What do you prefer? Or
let's ask also. Looking at the clock. Are there more questions in the room? Yes. Are there more questions from the stream? No. Shimon.
Thanks. So I have this question which is really searching my mind, and we are thinking about it already. That's how. What is the sequence? What are the steps to actually have basic income on European level? What must be done?
as a policy or as a pilot? Very different things. They're very different things.
What are the steps, or what is the sequence? Like what is your opinion? Like, do we need as many pilots as possible, or do we need some partial basic income as carbon dividend?
Right.
Or do we need one country to implement it and other countries to follow? Do we need to change treaties of the European Union, or can we work around? But,
I mean, in many ways, this, like, the question you want to ask yourself is, what are the possibilities, right? I mean, changing treaties in the European Union, I mean, good luck with that, right?
yeah.
I mean, you know, so...
it can be like the step, like...
No, exactly. But it kind of comes back. So at the very, very beginning, Daniel asked two questions, one for me and one for Fabienne, and we ended up talking about the Brazil thing. But if I remember correctly, one of the things you said is, should we have a strategy about letting 1,000 flowers bloom, or should we have something more focused? That was your question, right? So, and I think it relates. This is why I'm bringing it up. I think in many ways, you have to keep in mind that you're largely playing opportunities here, right? So you know there's little room in terms of what you can actually do, what you can achieve. I mean, you know, you're a small group. You're not having Elon Musk fund you or any of that, right? So yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, but. So when you're thinking about something like a sequence, what should we do first? I think the first thing you do is you check out what are some of the opportunities, and you wanna do something. You want to build on something. You want to be ready for grabbing opportunities wherever they happen. You set up a campaign for mayors for basic income. It's impossible to tell where that will go. It will very much depend on whether there's particular mayors who may jump on this. But let me give you a very concrete example. In the Netherlands, when they had their municipalities, there were a couple first that came up with this idea, and it started snowballing. It's not that they had a strategy and saying that we're going to try these, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. They were the municipalities themselves that say, hey, this is really interesting, I want to try. But then at some point they did face the problem, which was that, look, the national government came in, they said, look, within our framework, you need to adapt things. And then they had to make a strategic decision. And some municipalities decided to operate within this national framework, and other municipalities decided to do it differently. So I guess the question is, or the answer to that is, and sort of something similar with Brazil, right? The spread in Brazil. We're not controlling in Brazil which are the next municipalities, right? We're also not controlling if a next municipality is going to change the basic income in a particular way. They all are all changing it along the ways. But there is a way in which a lot of the Brazilian people, for example, the people that Fabienne is working with, that I'm working with, like Fabio Waltenberg, Leandro Ferreira, they're constantly talking to these people. They're constantly talking to these people and constantly explaining the view from basic income, et cetera, et cetera. So they're just engaging with them, right? So does that go anywhere? It's hard to predict, right? So, but my guess is, kind of trying to now answer your question, actually, because I realize I'm going all around. But I guess the fundamentals is it's very, very complicated, but you need to identify an opportunity and then work with that, and hoping that that will lead to something else. It's a snowballing effect, if you like. But it's impossible to predict. You may genuinely be spending a lot of time building up a network that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, that is the risk. I think we're all aware of that. Every single pilot, every single experiment, you know, it's never certain that it will have a policy effect. The one thing that's certain is if we don't do something like that, it's very likely not to have an effect, right? So this is kind of my answer. It's like, you know, but some of the examples you gave, like changing the EU regulations, I mean, that's so hard work that, you know, you need to start something much more locally and build from that. So that's one of the reasons why I think this MERS for basic income is a really interesting idea. And I'm interested to get a sense of what it is you're actually planning on doing. So.
And to jump onto this, even if you look at the Brazilian cases where you have a few stories that are successful, not all of these conversations with all of the mayors are actually successful. So in the beginning of the pandemic, aforementioned Fabio Waltenberg talked to the mayor in São Gonçalo, which is also in Rio de Janeiro state. It's a very, very poor municipality. They have a Bolsonarista mayor, and they all were also very interested in what was happening in Marica. And they had an advisory board, and in the end, they decided, nah, not for us. But like there was also a lot of talk and a lot of work that went into it. So even on a small level, that it does not necessarily mean that it takes hold, even if the opportunity is there, even if the interest is there. But it also shows that if it takes hold, something very good can come out of it, which is like, Niterói is an example of this. If this wouldn't have like spread the first time, in the end, it wouldn't have spread to Rio, which is not what is happening, which is a very, very different scale. So what Jurgen said, the only certain thing is that if we do nothing, nothing will happen. So, but it does not necessarily mean that if we do something, that something happens.
But so the Brazilian case shows something else, though. One of the key, what looks like at least one of the key factors that explains this boom has been the pandemic, right? So interestingly enough, the pandemic has led to some experimentation with basic income type of policies in many places. And immediately after the pandemic, it all went down again. Why is Brazil different? Because Marica already had this policy in place. They were before, and when the pandemic kicked in, it really gave this a boost. And suddenly all these neighboring cities were saying, oh, Jesus, this stuff really, really works. And then it started spreading. So we're still, I mean, you know, we're doing a whole project around this Brazil thing. We're still in the early stages of figuring that out. But it looks like the pandemic, but also the moment when something like the pandemic kicks in, where a policy already exists, it looks like that's an important factor. Now, you cannot well, you could engineer a pandemic, but it's not what we want to do, right? So we're not going to say, you know, let's plan this. Also, let's plan a pandemic at the right time, you know. But so stuff like that happens. You need to be agile enough to play into it, right?
There are people who are thinking that some people are planning a pandemic.
Well, let's not go there.
I think we can say that
we are officially not planning a pandemic. For
We are
everyone
not-
online, we are
exactly.
not planning pandemics.
UBI is not intending to plan any pandemics.
Neither is
in the
Vienna.
future. That's not the aim of this weekend. The aim of this weekend is to plan and kick off our campaign, Mayors for UBI. And I think we just heard very, very good inputs, very good thoughts, and especially very good questions. We will not be able to answer all the questions tonight, but that's also not the goal. The goal was to start the discussion, and for this, as you said, asking the right questions is a quite important thing. So thank you for everybody. For good questions, good thoughts. We have now, I think, plenty to focus on this weekend, and plenty of questions and ideas to discuss as we develop this campaign, not just we here in the room, not just we here in Krakow. I, of course, also invite everyone who has been watching this stream or will watch the recording. You find, of course, our contacts. You can write to contact@ubi.org and be part of this discussion. So for now, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jurgen. Thank you, Fabienne. Thanks, everybody in the
Thanks,
room.
everyone.
Thanks to Antonis for the technical management. And thanks also to the Nausicaa Foundation for hosting this evening and this weekend. We are very happy that we can be here. And yes, let's continue. Thank you very much.
Great.